good evening. Good evening and a very warm welcome in such actually crowded space, so that we even had to bring in additional chairs, which is great. So esteemed colleagues, students, special guests, in particular students and our esteemed speakers, it's fantastic to have you here. For what is the question, what about the S in ESG, stakeholder management and social accountability? It is actually the second time that we have this great exchange, and the second time that we have this great exchange with one of our highly esteemed founding companies, Bosch. And it follows on what we had last year, which was the title then was Meeting Tomorrow's Challenges, Is Stakeholder Capitalism the Answer? And I remember actually very vividly the fantastic discussions we had last year, the great excitement that the program brought about. And thus, there was no question that we actually should go again into this topic and discuss it again. And in particular, this is due to, say, the ingenuity and the great thoughts by Professor Christof Ehrhart, the Executive Vice President of Corporate Communications and Government Affairs at Bosch, and his magnificent team to make it work again. So these thoughts, these ideas came up, I think, out of a discussion we had maybe about 1.5 years ago or so, and we are extremely delighted that we can follow up on them in much more depth in also getting our student perspective into place. I'm also very pleased to welcome Dr. Stefan Hartung, the chair of the board of management of Bosch, as well as our other contributors to the panel discussion, Dr. Nicola Brandt, Ms. Katrin Elsemann, and Markus Müller, as well as our moderator, you could say long-term moderator, Monica Jones, or repeat long-term moderator, Monica Jones. Now, when you come to ESMT, you obviously expect that we would like to provide the platform for exactly these types of discussions, for discussions on a topic that has high relevance. It has high relevance for academia, it has high relevance for business, and at the same time, it has high relevance for society. As the question of stakeholder capitalism versus maybe shareholder capitalism or other types of ways is a very important one, and it's much more than a buzzword. It is important as it resembles, as it symbolizes, for example, in Germany, the notion of the soziale Marktwirtschaft, or if you coin it in an international term, that of Rhineland capitalism. It's also important as when executives, and this is my favorite one, you probably know this already by now, but when chief executives or top executives are asked what they think is more important when their company gets into a crisis. Is it more important to keep dividends constant, or is it more important to keep employment constant? Then the answers to this question are fundamentally different between Europe and the United States. The answer in Europe is in a very dominant way that executives would say, let's keep employment constant, let's rather cut on dividends. While in the United States, the answer predominantly is, let's rather cut employment and let's keep dividends constant. So therefore, this trade-off that is there between labor and capital is answered quite differently in different parts of the world. And you could say, and I think I was brought to this idea by Professor Ehrhart, today it's not only labor and capital, there are other things we need to consider. It's just about anything that relates to stakeholders, for example, when it comes to the ESG dimension here. So in that sense, you could augment this question by saying, what would you cut? Is it labor? Is it dividends? So this means, is it employment? Is it dividends? Or is it maybe any of the ESG dimensions here? It's also very clear that this is a topic that is not just somehow nice to have or good to have, but rather a must-have. And this is why I'm so delighted that we really have, as I said before, the perspective by our students here. And I'm very delighted that the students, that you worked on all this and that actually you can bring in all the expertise you've accumulated over the last 3 hours, as I heard, into the discussion. And I'm extremely thankful to Olga Almqvist, our senior manager of the ESMT Societal Impact Financing Initiative, to have moderated and you could say inspired all the discussions and the thoughts that our students will bring here tonight. Now, for us, this is a topic that goes beyond just this event. It goes beyond this event because what we have always focused on at ESMT is to think about how a stakeholder-oriented approach can be implemented in anything we do, in our executive education programs, in our degree programs. To give you one example, our flagship executive education program started this year, but it was last week. It started with the first week just concentrating on looking at all the stakeholders on each day. So this means what is the finance perspective, what is the employee perspective, what is the customer perspective, what is the ESG perspective. So really to focus on this very important part and thus to also take it into account in a broader perspective. And maybe to conclude on this, the broader perspective is that you've seen or may have seen that in 2019 in the so-called business roundtable, US companies said we actually should abandon the exclusive focus on stakeholder capitalism, but rather should go for something that is more stakeholder-oriented. At the same time, it's also clear that here in Europe, there needs to be a lot of focus, more focus also on what capital markets require. So maybe one of the big open questions is there maybe even some type of convergence of systems that we see? For the United States, some of the early studies show that despite the announcement, not much has changed in terms of the charters that the companies have. Others would claim this is not maybe the only criterion according to which this should be measured, but rather the overall attitude has changed. So therefore, I couldn't think of actually a more important, a more timely, and thus a more relevant debate than on this topic. And thus, I'm extremely delighted that you followed our invitation tonight and will join us for a discussion on the panel, but obviously also including all of you. With this, thank you very much again for coming. Thank you very much again to Bosch for the fantastic cooperation, which we highly appreciate and enjoy. And with this, over to Professor Ehrhart. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, a warm welcome also from my side on behalf of Robert Bosch Group. It gives me great pleasure to be once again here at ESMT tonight to continue the discussion which Professor Rocholl and myself actually started in a small circle on stakeholder capitalism and then extended to a larger group, including the students of ESMT. The question is, how can we create economic value in a way that at the same time we address societal and environmental needs? Last year's event was a great success. I guess it flashed us all because we learned a lot. We were inspired by the views of the younger generation. And so it inspired also Professor Rocholl and myself to continue on that path. And so I immediately agreed that we need to continue also the involvement of the students here and the larger community here in Berlin, because there are some guests also beyond the ESMT invited here to participate. This would not be possible without your great support. It was nice that you immediately joined our conversation and the cooperation and motivated students as well as staff here to cooperate with my team, with the Robert Bosch team, in order to make this happen. As Professor Rocholl said, the first event was about fundamentally the E in ESG, because we discussed how companies can reduce the environmental impact of their activities, contribute to combating climate change, and stay within the planetary boundaries, at the same time safeguarding their own future and be economic successful. And so we went along the alphabet and said this year we would like to focus on the S, because it's also important that we focus on the social dimension of companies' activities and their contribution to a more equitable, diverse, fair society. For Bosch, I can say it has always been of great importance to balance economic, ecological, and social responsibility in its business right from the start of the founding days when Robert Bosch in 1886 founded the company. However, when we are talking about how we can implement a more stakeholder-oriented approach, it's my firm belief that this can only work in dialogue between the stakeholders. That's why it is so important that you are here and that we have a chance to talk to you, to listen to you, and then maybe later also to find a larger scale and include further political decision makers, the financial sector, the civil society, other forces in order to make sure that they can make their contribution for us to succeed in aligning business and societal needs. Tonight's event is meant to provide a platform for such kind of dialogue, and I'm really pleased that we have such a variety of stakeholders present here to join us for the discussion. I'm really looking forward to it, and now it's my pleasure to hand over to our moderator, Monica Jones. The stage is yours, if you find your way on it here. Thank you.
Oh, come on, doors. This is good.
Thank you very much, Professor Ehrhart and also Professor Rocholl. And this is the first challenge, and I managed to do it. Thank you so much for your introductory remarks and also for inviting me back for this fantastic stakeholder forum, stakeholder event here, focusing on such a timely topic. And what a great question. What about the S in ESG? What about it? Social accountability in the context of business. When I was looking into the topic before arriving here, I was wondering, shouldn't that be a given? I mean, it's the year 2023, we're well into the 21st century. Social accountability shouldn't be such a great deal, certainly not in our hemisphere. But I know that you've been working this afternoon on a very specific, a very tricky task, and you probably figured out, well, maybe it should be a given, but it's difficult. It's not that easy. I mean, it could be such a great advantage, obviously. Companies that live the S, they come across as more human, more tangible. That's good, you know, because they seem to care about people, just as they do about profit margins, which is perfectly all right. Nobody says that the S has to get rid of business interests. Where would be the point? Of course not. You have to find a balance there. But the balance isn't easy. And then I was thinking, what happens if the alphabet you just mentioned, what happens if the E clashes with the S? What do you do then? Jobs? Dividends? Again, always those decisions you have to make. So, living up to the S in ESG is a challenge, but one that we are more than willing to tackle. And we're doing that with a fantastic lineup of speakers from business, from politics, from social entrepreneurship, finance, institutions, and we're doing it with you, with the fantastic students. And here's a camera, because I know there's a live stream, and at this point I just want to say hello. Very good to have you with us as well. Sadly, you can't interact with us, but I hope that we will have a lot of activity here and you can just enjoy the ride. And with that, I would like, with your support, this is tricky, so I would say you all go the long way, or you want to be very sporty and to jump up onto the stage. I would like to welcome our panelists. First and foremost, Dr. Nicola Brandt, head of the OECD Berlin Centre.
I think I can jump.
And we have this chair for you here. Then we would like to welcome Katrin Elsemann, social entrepreneurship expert, former advisor to the German Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Protection. Dr. Stefan Hartung, CEO Robert Bosch GmbH. Well, now you have to do it as well, don't you?
You do it even without.
And Markus Müller, Deutsche Bank, Chief Investment Officer, ESG, and Global Head of Chief Investment Office. And this chair is reserved for a very, very special panelist, one of yours, one of the students who is going to tell us what you were doing this afternoon, how you were doing it, and obviously engaging with the panelists as well. But first, I would like to start straight away with a question to all of you, because I just gave you sort of my little bit what I think social accountability is, what the S in ESG is. But before we discuss the S in ESG, can we define it first? Are we all on the same page? What is the S in ESG?
Well, I think it has many dimensions. It's the human dimension, if you will. So it can be labor relations. It can be, of course, how you treat vulnerable individuals. It's closely linked to the E, environment, because, well, if there are problems, you need somebody to report the problems. Often a degradation of the environment is linked to corruption. I think that's an important dimension of the S as well. And then, of course, it's the stakeholder engagement when you think about responsible business conduct. So a large field.
Stefan Hartung, we heard from Jörg Rocholl, of course, that the S could mean something else here in Europe than it does in the US or in China or in other parts of the world. As a company that actually operates in various parts of the world, what is social accountability for you?
I think the most important thing is that you first have to think about, do you want to be socially accountable as a company, right? You have to make that statement for yourself and for the outside world, because that's a major point before you finally fully will understand what all this social means, because there's an inside part of it, what you do inside of the company, how do you want to deal with people. It's a people question, right? It's a culture question. So how do you want to run the company? What is accountability in the company? How do people feel in the company? What is the cultural behavior which you admire to have in leadership, in people caring? How do you treat people in terms of when they have issues, and how is that done? I mean, overemployment is also not great in terms of social, but having people are very scarce resource in many areas of the world. So it's actually a must also to take care of that, right? If you don't, you risk the business. That should be clear. The second part is obviously outside the company. What is the company producing in terms of product, services, software, and so on? How is that in terms of, for example, endangering people or species or the world? So how is that to be seen? It's not just so environmentally to be seen, but also in terms of endangering life. Is it a dangerous product, or is it a tricky? You have to think yourself what you want to do as product and not. Do you want to do weapons or not? Which is a very tricky question today, right? That's a social question, a political question, maybe even. For example, do you want to do products and continue products which still are needed, but they're emitting CO2? That's an environment, but it's also a social question, because if you don't, maybe you don't have a lot of company left in the current state. So what do you do about this? And then comes the question about what do you do for the communities where you are? I mean, we have many hundred factories, so many thousand locations. So are we just hanging around there, or do we engage, or do we just consume it as it is, or do we do something? Yeah. What's about the partners? Supply chain partners, dealership partners. Do we accept that then bribery is used to do business, and just because it's common in this country where we act? Or do we say we are coming like with a spaceship as aliens and we don't do it? So what's the action, and what's our statement towards it? And this is kind of the sphere what you're talking about. And then there's a lot of representatives for this, which we would call stakeholders. It could be internal stakeholders, outside stakeholders, politicians, it could be mayors, it could be whatever, and that's very different by country, by operating area, because if you talk to a politician in Germany, it's a bit different than you talk to a politician in China. But does it mean if you are in China you shouldn't talk to politicians? Probably not. That also is in this area, different. Right? I would see this as a pretty much, it's a holistic question, the social. It's not just what it's resonating first, it's much more.
It certainly sounds like an awful lot of work. Katrin Elsemann, Stefan Hartung just said something about, with all the questions that he raised, that obviously also he has, the company has to deal with on a daily basis, I should imagine. Also mentioned something about, about the product, and if it is something that is harmful, and if it's harmful to the environment, it's also harmful to people. Do you think that the S is going, or could basically be the make or break part of the ESG for a certain industry? You know, will we see certain businesses just cease to exist because they can't live up to it simply because of what they do?
I'd say I would really not want to divide the E and the S and the G. I believe you cannot full-heartedly embrace the E if you don't embrace the S, and you cannot full-heartedly embrace the S if you don't embrace the G. Because first of all, it's about transparency. We can talk a lot about how much we fulfill the E criteria or the S criteria if we're not transparent in our governance about it. This is how do we treat our employees? What type of contracts do we have with our supply chain suppliers upstream? How does it look downstream? I mean, we have to be very transparent there, and I think this is why the G is one of the most important letters in that alphabet as well. So I would
next year here.
Maybe next year here. So I certainly believe that the S is very pivotal, obviously, because, I mean, let's take a look at Germany right now. We have a shortage of skilled labor. So the way how we treat people, how we treat our potential employees, our current employees, is a very important factor also for the attraction of employees, I'd say. So I see this as a huge opportunity for all companies to embrace ESG for 3 reasons. Like, the one is for the external impact of your organization, obviously, and the internal impact. Secondly, for the interest of your consumers and customers, if they want to buy from you or purchase from you or trade with you. And thirdly, obviously, it's attractive for employees, you know, because more and more employees, and I would hope the younger generation is very aware of that as well, is interested in knowing, okay, what is the company doing? A part of hopefully paying me a good salary, a decent salary. Is it actually transparent? Is it honest? What type of kind of work-life balance do I have when I work in that company? And also, what is the impact of the company on society? And society embraces the E and the S. For social entrepreneurs and social enterprises, obviously the S is very much in the product and the service that they deliver, that they produce. Because social enterprises provide innovative solutions to social issues, education, health, integration, but also environmental questions. But also social enterprises have to ask themselves, okay, are we fulfilling ESG criteria also in our organization, in our governance, and in our supply chain? Because that's part of the deal. I'd say you can't be a social enterprise if at the same time you would violate those criteria in your organization or in your value chain.
Okay, so they're all closely linked. However, I'm absolutely certain that certainly nobody here in the room or who's joining us online is even questioning the need for ESG. The question is rather, how do you actually fill it with life? Because that is certainly easier said than done. And I'm just wondering, Markus Müller, in the financial world, social accountability, do I have to imagine that social accountability for a bank, for instance, is that you will give the credit, you will lend money to the person in need because that's your social duty? Or will you ask, what do you need the money for? And then you decide, because maybe the money is used for something that would harm someone else. I mean, how does social accountability in the finance industry look like?
Thank you very much for having me and also for this 2 very great questions, because this opened a little bit the room for my definition of the S coming from a finance perspective, but as an economist going a little bit deeper also into it, if I may. So first of all, I think from an investment perspective, first, from a financial market perspective, the S is the ugly duckling in the ESG. This is quite clear. It will be a beautiful swan if we a little start more to understanding what the S really means, because systematically, the S is the only part of this equation which can reduce the systematic risk also from the E and the G. If you think about this, this is very logic, because the harmful impact on nature, E, or wrong governance is designed by the S. So if the S is not well designed, to whatever reasons, not enough gender diversity, not enough ethical diversity, age diversity, leads really to behavioral biases which will distort your decision or even will lead to a huge destructive force towards nature. So this is the ugly duckling we need to understand. At the same time, I think we need to understand that the S is not the starting point. So for me, this equation makes sense, at least to the degree that we just will solve the problem of ESG sustainability, or however we would like to call it, including the S, if we start to understand that we are part of nature, full stop. Because due to the fact that we are living in nature, we are dependent on nature, we consume nature. This is consumption. Consumption is per definition, as David Graeber already said, so maybe it's not expected that a banker, by the way, I never want to be a banker, now I am a banker since 16 years, that a banker is talking about David Graeber, but David Graeber brought it really to the point that consumption is per definition always destructive. We can do whatever we want. We will remain destructive creatures. The question is how strong the destruction of our natural engine which sustains us will be. And this brings me then to the point, if we understand this, that we are part of the E, then we need to understand, in my point of view, why do we have to ask the question whether a bank will lend the money to someone who needs this or dependent on the purpose? Why we have a differentiation between the US and the EU maybe in the question about how shall we deal with stakeholder capitalism? And I think the question stems from the self-understanding of societies. An overall economy just can be designed as the society is able to support it. Just if a society understands the need for social inclusion, the society understands the equality of life, the society is able to vote in the direction that such an economic system will happen. And, to be honest, if we go into the Christian social science, right, in the 30s of the last century, in the discussion between Eucken, Alfred Müller-Armack, Röpke, and co., then we know exactly what the social market economy was meant to be, a program with a social pillar. But based on a dedicated self-understanding, which unfortunately was buttressed by the Second World War. And now to closing this. This means it depends on the role of the institution in a society, what kind of role this institution has to play. And this depends on how the society is defining itself based on its understanding where the society belongs to. And this is very important to define and also to create this narrative in order to vindicate one's decisions. And I think in this direction we have to lead the discussion in our houses as well as also at the markets.
I would like.
Sorry, long definition.
No. Fascinating, and there was. I wanted to pick up several times. I now pick up.
Saw it.
No. Because this all makes very interesting questions to continue. The last point. I wanted to throw to Nicola Brandt, because when we're talking about basically a society needs to define what it stands for, does this let business then off the hook? Which part of society is, who is deciding then what standards there are, what principles there are? And I know the answer to that question will be no, it doesn't let business off the hook, but I have to ask that anyway. And secondly, there are these guiding principles, OECD manual book, guiding lines, like 51 countries subscribe to it. So those 51 countries, let's say, they all have the same definition of which values their society should live up to. All the others don't. Is it that easy? No.
I do concur that, of course, societies and cultures can differ, and in that way it will also differ how they define social responsibility in some ways. But as you said, I'm from the OECD, so the OECD, like other international bodies, the UN, but also the ILO, has in our case, we call it guidelines for multinational enterprises. So where 51 countries, 2/3 of international trade, have come together and have defined what it actually means to be socially responsible, or to be responsible along your entire supply chain. And this is a very comprehensive standard. It comprises E, the environment. We just had an update to strengthen the climate policy dimension, biodiversity. But it also, basically, it tells you shouldn't do harm to people, the planet, or society, right? So it's about labor relations. We have a big chapter about corruption that we just strengthened. But again, as others have said before, this is really closely linked. So harms to the environment will often happen when there is corruption going on. There's a chapter on digitalization, new technologies, so how do you handle that responsibly? Or the consumers, consumer interests. And it's not only guidelines, right? This is just some words that you've written down, but then there are whole procedures behind it, stakeholders getting together in some specific sensitive fields like textiles and garment. They're really very concrete due diligence guidelines, how to approach this, or minerals in critical minerals in conflict countries, for example, because one task these guidelines give a company is also to engage responsibly. So if you have a country that is fragile because of its fragile governance, that doesn't mean that you stay away from the country and so you source from a country that is already a democracy like-minded. No, you work with the host government, you work perhaps with stakeholders on the ground, you work with your suppliers and try to minimize harm. And that will help you as a company to be part of, a world that can improve, but also ensure that, for example, when we're talking about the E, so climate transition will really be dependent on critical minerals. They are often very concentrated in some countries and not always in countries where you can be sure that the E, the S, or the G will be safe, let's say, from the outset. Mm-hmm. So the guidance really tells you how to go about that, so it can ensure access to critical minerals and at the same time corporate social responsibility.
So the guide is the silver bullet, especially in tricky situations for a company.
Well, I'm not sure it's the silver bullet, but it's something, a starting point for governments, for businesses, and their relationships, but also stakeholders, society, to get together and to work on those issues, which can be very thorny.
If I quickly may add to this, I agree. Although I think the world has changed during the last 20 years tremendously from the structure. I studied Chinese and I just was in Lisbon on an ocean conference and discussed with many African countries. And unfortunately, I have to say, even if they would subscribe to the content, they maybe not anymore subscribe to the Western institutions. Mm-hmm. And this is a huge problem, because it doesn't mean that this booklet, this guideline is bad. It shows us just that the global north maybe have overdone it a little bit. And that these things are starting, these guidelines are starting in developed economies. But a not developed economy has complete different questions and problems to answer before they even can think about the right of equal wages, if they do not have the basis, the basics in economy developed, right? Like milk in Uganda or chicken, all these agriculture things. I think we are now at a time, or in a time, if we talk really serious about this, that we have to step out of our Northern Hemisphere comfort. Because it's really close to 12. And a last example, which it made me smile on the one side, because I've never really thought, although I'm focusing on oceans, on the horse mackerels. But the Minister of Environment from Angola talked about the conflict with Namibia about horse mackerels. Because of currents in the ocean and weather phenomena, the horse mackerels are sometimes swimming more to Angola, and then the ships are going out and overfishing them. Sometimes they are swimming more to Namibia, and then the Namibians are going out and overfishing them. The result is the big fisher fleets getting the catch. The poor fishermen don't get the wages. Angola and Namibia are suffering both because they overuse the global commons. And at the same time, there is no regulation, nothing, piracy, what have you. So this is an S problem par excellence, right? I think we need to broaden this as well. Sorry, but this triggered a little bit also this discussion, as we know that we are dependent on cooperation, right? And cooperation is very, very fragile.
Be triggered. Being triggered is good. I can see the reactions of Stefan Hartung. He's also triggered with several things he's heard here already. But I wanted to first bring in Katrin Elsemann, because I know that you co-founded 2 social enterprises, and as I said, you also advised the German Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Protection. So from what you've heard here, from both those OECD guidelines and the reality on the ground in the Global South, for example, so we're sitting here in a beautiful room in Berlin, the European School of Management Technology. Are we too aloof when we talk about the S in ESG?
Well, I think we are not honest most of the times, right? None of us is really, most corporates aren't, most governments aren't. That example that you've just made, I mean, we all know that Western African coasts are overfished by European and North American and other and Japanese and other kind of companies, not by the Senegalese ones, right? So I mean, we have to make some more honesty into the discussion, I would say. In general, I kind of liked what you alluded to in the beginning, where you said, okay, we have had the social kind of market deal in Germany. We have the concept of the ehrbare Kaufleute, ehrbare Kaufmänner, I'd say, which somehow has changed a lot. And right now, it's still way more profitable to start a destructive business than to start a sustainable business. It is way more profitable to invest in rather destructive assets than into investment classes that are, that have the sustainability rating, right? So that is the deal. As long as the money flows into destructive fields, and it does, if we don't have regulations in place, unfortunately, then we can't blame anyone, and particularly not less developed countries who absolutely have the right to kind of get the basic needs in place, right? So in terms of when working as a social entrepreneur or advising the ministry, first of all, I'm always looking for the level playing field here. So what type of conditions or framework, political frameworks do we need for companies who are honest and are serious about social and sustainability reasons? What type of conditions have to change when accessing finance and capital? If I go to my bank and I want to have a loan for starting up my company, and I say, look at my business plan, I will integrate 500 former refugees into labor by end of next year because I have a very innovative concept. And I'm sure the bank manager says to me, well, yeah, interesting, and how much money are we making out of that? Well, he won't talk like that, but you know what I mean.
Because you're not honest.
If I go there and say, I have this wonderful sales platform for the 30-something kind of commercial, buy my toothbrush, I don't know, stuff, then it's rather easy to find a business plan that shows you that there's a lot of margin and you'll get investments. So this is a particular problem that we have, and this is why we need to be more transparency, and we need more regulation that kind of says, okay, this is what the ESG and the taxonomy will do. These are markets, this is sustainable, and they are social, and this is what we want. As Europe, if we start as Europe, then we have to start as Europe. I mean, yes, I know we are here in a global playing field, right? And this is something that we have to discuss about. We cannot kind of ignore the knowledge that we have now. I mean, digitization is such a powerful tool, and we know where our minerals come from. We know where we source them from. We know what's happening upstream and what's happening downstream, because our world is more and more transparent there. So if we want, we have the knowledge, and I think we should use it.
So we need binding rules, not just guidelines, we need regulation, which of course a lot of the bigger companies, the traditional companies that have been in business for many, many years are not so keen on. I would like, before we get to the workshop of this afternoon, which will be a very, very specific example, I would like to go back to our business representative here on stage, Stefan Hartung, and perhaps it would be good to get a concrete example, maybe even two, one from the Northern Hemisphere, because we need social accountability here too, obviously, and one from the so-called Global South, whichever region you choose. But what exactly can an established company like Bosch do to show social accountability?
I mean, most important is we come to that regulation question on the general regulation. So, what should governments regulate, and what should they better stay away from? This ESG thing, in the end, for corporate leadership team, is a regulatory concept, right? We have to regulate it for us, because it's interesting to know that there's a regulation in Germany and Europe, and yeah, there's also one in the US and one in China, but in the end we have to define what we want to do and what we don't want to do. And so it's our code of conduct, which we write, which we send to our suppliers and say, this is what you have to adhere to. Yes, there is a statement in there, you have to adhere to law, yeah, which is different, by the way, in each other, but we have certain other things standing in there which we say, this is what we want, right? We don't want that you infringe with child labor or human rights and all that. You have to state that explicitly, and it's important that every company goes through that process trying to state explicitly what you want. And inside of the company, you also have to agree on this, because it can't be that there's one business unit which is thinking that it's kind of okay to do much better cash flow, do some infringement, right? That's not okay. So there is a regulatory aspect. It's a pretty boring aspect if you think about it. It's such an interesting subject, and then you write regulation, and you have to put it in words, and you have to roll it out, and you have to communicate it, and you have to audit it, and you have to go after it. But it's important to do that, because otherwise you can't form this agreement. And that's another thing. In the company, whatever the situation of employees is where they live, they could live in an autocratic regime, in a democratic regime, whatever where they live. If they are employers and they come to the company, wherever they come in the US, in Germany, in India, China, wherever they come in, they have to feel at home in a way that they know that these are the rules of the company inside. This is how it works, right? Even if the jurisdiction is different. And I know it's a tricky thing, but that's what you have to try to achieve, because that's your culture. That's your space you can define. And there is a lot of things. I think you can do many businesses, even the most destructive businesses, which you think you're pumping oil out of the ground, right? Which you say, oh my God, how can you do that? Yeah, we don't do that. We'll give you this example, but still, you can do this in a, let's say, at least acceptable manner, because oil is needed. So, or you can do it in a very destructive manner by using slave labor and destroying the half environment and doing without any governments and cheating and greed and all this. So there is even in any business you do, in any area you do, you can do it good or bad. And then you have, on some things also, you have to give examples and do things as also, it may sound symbolic, but it's important that you do those. This community work stuff, the stuff which you try to do good in a country or so. So yes, we have this initiative, we have these things, whatever, in India, we have an initiative which you do, if people drop out of school, we pick them up and do something with them to get a training, or we have a school feeding initiative in India, or so those things. This sounds unimportant, because you know what, for such a big company, is it so important to do these things? I think it is important, because that gives identity. And if you ask our employees and our leadership teams, everybody will know that we strive for being a good community citizen also. Everybody knows that it's trying to be also a good company for not only the people we work with directly, but also people we live with. I think that's important things. By the same time, if you don't do a business, performing business, right, you will risk the whole thing. And that's the thing on ESG. I mean, we can say that ESG is an essential part of business, but it cannot replace business. It's not possible. And then if we come to the question, should we regulate then? And that's an interesting thought. Should we regulate that certain things should not be done, other things should be done? Well, as long as the population of the planet needs it, it's a luxury to stay away as a country from it. For example, the Germans decided to stay away from fracking of their gas, right? They don't do it. They don't do fracking in Germany. But we use fracking gas. Quite a luxurious position, right?
We also
very interesting.
Nuclear
it's a social,
power without having
it's a democratic decision or not democratic. They have to discuss it. So I have to accept that as a company. But as a company, I have to make also these kind of choices, what I do and what I don't do. I just said, I don't do direct weapon production, but am I contributing with dual-use products if they're used in defense? Do I try to prohibit this if it's allowed, if it's not sanctioned, or do I say, okay, it's agreed on that we can do this? These are difficult questions you have to judge on. In the end, it's a decision of the company and of the management team of the company. And by the way, if I do certain things in this company we have, and people think this is not correct, you cannot imagine what happens. Then I get a big storm at me because our own people are the most critical ones, what we do and what we don't do. And that's actually a good sign. That's a good sign for me, because if we do certain things and publish certain things, then I get a whole bunch of feedback that, hey, how can you do that? This is definitely not okay. Why do you do this kind of thing? This sounds for me quite regulating. I'm stakeholder managing. I'm managed, stakeholder managed.
So you welcome feedback, and you also just built a very interesting bridge between the S in business and the S in politics, because there certainly some of the examples you mentioned really goes hand in hand. Katrin Elsemann.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a question though, because Bosch is a steward-owned company, right? And I think this is a very important factor here. Many of social enterprises are cooperatives or steward-owned or other type of governance that are very stakeholder-focused and not only shareholder-oriented. But if you have a strong shareholder value model, it is very difficult then to discuss this openly and say, well, actually there's a big trade-off between dividends and the S and the G. And then if you have a shareholder board, then it will say, sorry, then go for the dividends, right? If you have a stakeholder board, if you have a cooperative, if you're a steward-owned company, then that's different. Because then obviously you don't have to only to go with the money. You should always make your business stable, obviously, and be profitable, because that is why you are there also. But I think it's a very important topic also on our culture, right? When we start up a company, when I started my businesses, I was kind of pushed into venture capitalism ideas. And I said, well, I don't know if that really suits us, but well, okay, so here I pitch and I want €1 million, okay. If I'm loud enough and if I speak up loud enough and I have the highest sum that I need, then I probably get an investor. And realizing that there are other ways of starting a business, that is not all about exit, it's not all about shareholder value. There are different types of ways of doing business, of starting companies. I think this is very important when thinking about how we fulfill ESG criteria.
If I quickly may add...
Very quickly, because this was just perfect as a lead into our student
Sorry
case.
that I destroyed this, but I think I have to owe something from a financial perspective. So when we talk, and I agree, when we talk about why banks, the financial market are making which decisions, then we need to know that all decisions are based on information, and we have hinted it already, right? We do not have the information sufficiently available we need in order to make an S-conform decision making. And this is one of the biggest problems. And the same problem occurs with the E. But I'm comfortable that we will over time move away from the things. Unfortunately, the driving force of society is moving away from traditional thinking is always when the marginal utility gets negative, so when we have a pressure point. This is, I think, the reality we have to face. At the same time, we need to accumulate knowledge. We have to acquaint ourselves with these concepts. And then I think about Michael Sandel, who is saying we have to move away from equality of general equality questions towards the direction of equality of contribution, right? Because our system right now rewards people who do not contribute to the society and gives disadvantages to people who really contribute to society. And this is for me the same as the GDP and the value question. stock versus flow. We are not talking about the ES as our stock we are dependent on. We are talking about individuals as a flow. They come, they go, hire and fire. This is wrong, because innovation comes through these people. Right? We are the ones who are designing our society and hence economy as a result out of it. Do we have this discussion? No. And I think if also science can help us to get this contribution and can help us to understand this better, investors also will start trading based on different information. And this is a long voyage, deliberately used voyage, but I think we can get there.
It's a very upbeat statement as I bring in a student who is going to share with us how they tackled a very, very tricky situation. One about social accountability in a former startup with problems they run into half the way. But I'm not giving it away. I'm just going to find my way down. And if I were to wear trainers, I would be sporty, but this way I don't dare to. And I now would like to welcome Ogbogu Kalu, full-time MBA candidate, co-president Net Impact ESMT Berlin. Hi, do you want to stand here? Do you want to stand there? Where do you feel comfortable? Because I think you will need this. So I was sort of teasing everybody already. I mean, I know that you know what you were doing this afternoon, but for our panelists. So you had a task to solve, to deal with. Some company that ran into trouble.
Yes.
And had to make a decision. Tell us about that.
Yes, so it's a great company by an ESMT alumni, fictional. And essentially, like what the company does is they make like phones, but the key like USB is like they make modular parts for these phones. So it's very sustainable, leads to carbon reduction, great initiative. Mm-hmm. The challenge though was they focused and they were doing really well, looked at in the industry as like the darling for like eco-friendliness, but they neglected the social aspect of ESG. So they're finding themselves like facing like bad publicity, like because of a scandal.
So what happened?
In the Democratic Republic of Congo. So they mine their rare earth minerals from Congo and Bolivia, and they didn't do like enough due diligence in making sure like the workers had like a proper human rights considerations. So, so that's the challenge. So the CEO has a decision to make. Do I sell off to like a bigger like electronics company?
Get rid of the problem?
Get rid of the problem. We should survive, or do I invest, like money, talent, effort into getting us where we need to be, not just environmentally, but in the social aspect as well.
And in order to make that decision, which is a big decision, he sat down with various stakeholders, didn't he?
Yes, he did. So
do we need to click something? Have you been instructed?
I have not been instructed.
We have not been instructed to click. Do we need to click? We need to click. I've never clicked any, green probably. Green is
when in doubt, right? Yeah.
Case study. There. And these are the people he invited, and you should be able to see that here. Good.
So these are the different stakeholders. So we have the CEO, has a difficult decision to make. We have a VC, has been with the company from the start, from seed, Series A, Series C. In fact, before this scandal, they had invested 13 million euros. Right, so very dedicated VC. We have an employee representative, has been with the company since the beginning, has known the CEO for 15 years. Very dedicated, really passionate about like eco-friendliness, and has recently started like thinking more about like social responsibility because his fiance works in a trade union. There is a trade union representative from Congo. They weren't involved with the actual mine that this challenge is about, but they see this as an opportunity to leverage the current discussion to negotiate like better wages for their union representatives. There's a member of a non-governmental organization from Bolivia, and their take is unique, is interesting. I'll talk about it later. And then finally, we have a representative of the local government here. because
Okay.
it's a Berlin
It's,
based.
I saw it was somebody from a Berlin government representative. So, okay, we give the main takeaways already. Is this too soon? No, we just ignore, because I would like, so you had all these people coming together. And how difficult was it to come to a solution? Did some of them refuse to agree to the solution? Did they all eventually end up on the same page?
That's a great question because it brings back, like, I think we dabbled on this like last year, who makes the decision? And in this case, it's up to one person, the CEO, to decide whether everybody likes it or not. So we had 6 teams, 5 decided to stay, not sell, or the CEO decided to stay, not sell, so 5 CEOs, and 1 decided to, sell to the bigger electronics.
Do we know what triggered that decision? Because, I mean, it was role play, right? But I'm sure that everybody was taking it very seriously. And I, for one, find it very difficult to imagine that the VC investors think it's a brilliant idea to put more money into a business that right now isn't really selling that much and may not ever recover from the scandal.
Yes. So I would say for the companies that did, like the 5 that stayed together, I think key words that came up was rebuild is crucial, like a rebranding is crucial. And then it was just a matter of each person seemed to believe in that, aside from the VC bringing in the money and then convincing or seeing, if they can buy back faith. The second thing was, I made a quick note, way forward through cooperation. So, we are 6 stakeholders at the table. If we each bring what we can, there seems to be like a way where we could potentially put the social aspect first. On the end of the one CEO that decided not to, I believe it was more like a trade-off between values and profit, and asking, do I feel at this point I can meet the social responsibility required, and feeling this other company can, definitely, there's no guarantee I can. So I think that was the trigger for that decision. Yeah.
So, what did you all learn from that? Were the takeaways from this particular workshop?
Yes, so first one, it's very complex. So I think we've heard already, like there are trade-offs. So there are trade-offs, with each of the elements, there are trade-offs with environment and sustainability. But I think the big thing here, and I'm coming back to the Bolivian NGO, is you have someone that is coming into the table and saying, in my country, it's illegal for overwork, overtime, right? But we need this to support our GDP. And so you're faced with the decision, am I supporting this initiative, which is technically legal, or am I doing what's legal, but will basically not be great for the people of that community? So balance is key, and it's very complex to do so. There was the aspect of decision makers in the corporate world need to consider both immediate and long-term implications. So in this case, it goes back to the person saying a way forward is through cooperation, and rebranding is key, because if different people, if you have different competitors, how do you differentiate yourself? If you were known, because this company was known as a company that strives to be above and beyond in eco-friendliness, if you neglect or shy away from this challenge, how does that affect EU long-term? And I think I really like this one. How can we make the figures match intention? So people might say it's naive, like the 5 CEOs that voted, yeah, let's do it. But it's should that be the comment, or should it be more focused on how can we make this less naive? How can we make it obvious that this is the way, by making the figures, the numbers financially match, the intention. So
Which role did you have in the workshop?
I co-facilitated, so many hats, but at heart, I would have liked to be the CEO.
Okay. Do I have to press something else, or was this the last slide? Last slide? Last slide. Then I would like to thank you, and you may join the round on stage.
Thank you so much.
So, and because there is a video, I promised I would do that. So, Stefan Hartung, CEO, sort of the closest. You have a great company. And then there's one mistake, an oversight, not intentional. You probably didn't know about it. But somebody found out, and now it hangs around your neck, and customers don't trust you anymore. It's probably a bit like sort of further sort of remember Dieselgate when people said they wouldn't trust anymore. So it's you can't take it back. It's out there, and you're a company that, as Bongo said, should be above standards because that's actually your USP. And people don't buy your product anymore, so there's less capital. But you would actually have to invest more in order to get your reputation back, in order to be accountable socially, in order to mine elsewhere or to raise the standards. Your employees are extremely worried, and obviously you feel that. You could get out easily and sell to a bigger company who cannot guarantee that they'll do it any better. But you'd be rid of the problem. What do you do?
Well, getting rid of the problem is definitely a dangerous path, right? Because the problem is still yours, even if you sell it, right? I mean, if I deal with whatever dangerous chemical stuff and I spoil the half country with it, and then I sell that spoiling element of my company to some other person or organization, and it will still stick with us that we have done it, right? So there is no other way than to tackle the problem and fix it in a way that you can't fix the past, but you can show with full dedication that you bring in methods, procedures, facts to never let this happen again and do better, much better. I mean, you have still the business decision if this is a great business. That's another thing. I mean, you can exit any business. If it's not working, exit it, right? That's not a social question. You cannot run an uneconomic business. But if you have done something wrong and it's visibly violating the S or the E, both can happen, by the way, and it could be, normally it's associated with the G, because that's what you're penalized afterwards for as a management team, that you haven't had the oversight. You mentioned it. Nobody will say that you personally spoiled the ocean or you personally did something wrong, but you haven't seen it, and your system of the company wasn't good enough designed so that this couldn't happen. So what do you do now? The problem is the problem, you have to tackle the problem, and then you have to fix the whole thing from the G side backwards over S and G. And you have to do this publicly and clearly communicate what you're doing, because hiding it is no solution anymore. Yeah, your people, everybody is looking at you because that has been messed up. Okay, you remember all these things where then remember this German thing where the coffee was not 500 gram anymore but 450. That was today would have been as consumer cheating, right? So then the CEO had to come in TV and say, sorry, we are back to 500 again.
It's actually a very
that's
timely,
a very old one from the 80s, right?
Very timely example you're giving when you go to
right now.
supermarkets.
By the way, it's coming back right now, the discussion if we should reduce content of packages and just keep the same package size, or if that's an efficient. And that's very interesting subject because that's typical marketing stuff, guru stuff, right? Just put one thing off, take the same margin. But if you have done such a mess, you have to get in. And then it's not enough to say, okay, we have put it back, but what did we put now in our company? Why we will never do this again, and what's in the value part of this? It's a pretty tricky thing.
Yeah,
it's very difficult, and it's normally it comes. And you said it also. It comes back to the personal action of the CEO very often, because that's the chief communicator at that point, right? It's not the design of the communication, but that is the person that has to tell it to the world, and you have to be. It has to be absolutely the truth, right? Otherwise, you are putting yourself at a personal risk, which is unsustainable.
Just to let you know, because we have 25 minutes until the official time is up, and obviously, if you have questions, make sure that you can think of them right now, because once I got feedback from everyone, then I would like to look at you, and I would like to see lots of arms up in the air, so I have to choose and not wait. Everything you said has depends on money to some extent.
Absolutely.
You can be the greatest communicator in the world, but nobody gives you the money you need in order to still survive. See, Markus Müller. VC investors, they've had enough. They believed in this product, really cool, you know. That scandal, that was just, you know, why sink more money? Company isn't worth as much as it is before. But the CEO says, yeah, you know, but we can fix it. What do you do?
Not immediately believing what the CEO is saying, right? Because he has a reason to say that. So either he knows that it won't be fixable, that he can be very honest, but then he should step down, right? But if he says he can fix it, it can mean both, right? That he can't do it and he knows it, but he's not saying it, or he knows he can do it and is convinced and he's saying it that he can do it. So. Of course, you go back to the textbook stuff first of all, right? To analyze again what's in there, etc., and what's true about it. But we have many of those examples, and you said something very important, and I think this is an identification question, especially in a time of digitalization and availability of information. How good is a company to tell its narrative, so to provide its values and beliefs in this specific context, but also in the direction towards the future? Because this responsibility might be reciprocal, but in the end, the CEO has to convince the future expectations which are traded at the markets. This is a tricky topic, and one or two industries are seeing this right now. The one industry since years, and one industry a little bit less long. But this is financial industry and automotive industry, right? And one big problem I see here in these two industries are the two things, and maybe this helps us a little bit to understand also the reaction function of or potential reaction function of a CEO. Financial industry currently is not able to convey the necessity why it should exist. So big companies understand this, maybe wealthy people understand this, right? But the majority of this world has problems to understand what a financial market is doing. And not because of they are not educated, because of they are not exposed to it, right? And they see then all these negatives. So why do we have a financial market and banks and insurance companies, all this stuff? We have to invent ourselves, and also then the communication, the integrity of us, because we are intermediaries for risk management, right, and for providing capital, etc. This is important. For the automotive industry, I think we have a challenge in the context of that we are not able to redefine mobility. We still think that we also will in future sit in boxes with 4 wheels and with an engine. We are not discussing mobility. We are discussing exchanging a combustion engine by a battery. But does it change mobility? No. Where is the future of automotive industry in this context? So both examples show me that the relevance to the needs of a society in the future is utmost important to convince that the CEO will be able to deliver results in fixing the problem. If the society in general doesn't believe anymore in the business model in the industry where the company is in, it's difficult.
But maybe jump on one thing that's very cool. We always talk about society, right? This is since
very abstract.
I've done a bit of marketing stuff, right? It was quite interesting, because then you try to work with the consumer, which is kind of like the society, but it's not like it really, because it's an actually fascinating point that this consumer, which does a purchasing decision and buys himself some great car because it's just fun to have it and a show off for the neighbor, or something crazy, which has nothing to do with transportation, by the way. It's just they put a nice leather seat in there to show your family that you really have it, right? This consumer behavior is sometimes even collectively different than the public opinion of the society.
Exactly.
And that's a really strange thing we observe, and this distance becomes bigger in some subjects. That you see the same time that we all agree, if we're sitting here and we all would raise our hand, that we want to do good and we want to do this and that, and then a lot of us go out
and do something
personally
else.
the opposite.
Yeah.
Without being mean,
Because-
right?
Without being bad, without feeling bad, without
No,
being
we're
bad.
I
just want to mention
just
that.
being
That's
human. Just being human.
just being human,
yeah?
exactly. And that's what we have also to
Take
accept.
us out of the equation and the planet is safe.
But maybe to
Yes.
make this very, very, very clear, why this happens now.
Yes.
The information are far more or faster available than decades ago. So we really have a change in the availability of information and communication, and also of the ability of individuals to make judgments. We are a far more educated and enabled society in making judgments than 50 years before. And this is right. Maybe we are not there where we should be, but the society is absolutely correct in being skeptical about big business models and also industries. And this is just now additional complexity, but I think there are ways to do it, but it's hurt sometimes.
Just to bring it back to that workshop case, and then I would like to hand over to Nicola Brandt, who has been very, very patient with us. When you mentioned the example about the financial sector, sort of basically like the automotive mobile sector, feeling the pinch because of what happened in the past, mistakes that were made, and that reputation, once it's gone, it's very difficult to build again. Of course, would also explain why VC investors would, not just because for the money that they might lose, but also because of the reputation, that they invested in a company that they thought was really onto something, and now is caught in a scandal, so you want to step away from that because you already have enough problems to deal with. Nicola Brandt, you've been taking so many notes, I would like to know.
No, I'm really grateful for the example you worked on, because it's really the perfect business case for the OECD guidelines for due diligence in the mineral sectors. And I was also very glad about what you said, Stefan Hartung, about, you have to fix the problem, because that is what the guidelines would tell you, responsible engagement, and I said it before, rather than disengagement. I think what's also important here is to note that these guidelines and other guidelines that are aligned with it are a risk-based approach. So you can never know everything at every point about all of your suppliers, right? But what you have to do is, when you learn about something that's big, then you need to react. And so I like the CEOs who didn't disengage, and also the financiers, because it's actually important. And I think it relates to something, Michael, that you said before, which is, well, we can't always take the Western view. We have to take into account the needs and the starting points of the global South. And here it was also great to have, somebody from an NGO, from Bolivia, etc. Because, of course, sometimes in these countries, business will not be aligned with what our values are. There may be informal business, there may be, informal mining, and that doesn't mean you should disengage necessarily from it, but as a company sourcing, you need to try and understand how things can be improved, and that's very important. And perhaps one last point that we wanted to pick up, which is regulation. So do we need binding laws rather than standards, voluntary standards, which the OECD guidelines, for example, are? And I think often in an ideal world, if we were all the same, if we all had the same starting positions, regulations would be best. A global CO2 price would be best, right? But because starting positions are not the same, and also systems are not the same, we cannot agree on it. If we could agree on it globally, we could solve many problems of the global commons, but we can't. So we have to try and do a second best approach, where we basically try to engage along our supply chains and try to identify risks like the one that Ogbogo and his colleagues worked on, and see how you can remediate as best you can.
Ogbogo, having listened to all that, Would that have been helpful for the workshop, or just making it more complicated?
Both. No, yeah, a bit of both, and some clarification in the sense that immediately, like they found out, they stopped mining from the, like the mine. They were checking, like going on site and making like those decisions. So I think everything that could have been done was done, and then the decision is, this is costing me a lot. I have already done my due diligence. Should I keep and try to even go above and beyond, or should I give to this person, which I know already meets the industry standards and can because of their skill? So it's interesting in that sense. It's not I left it, I will leave it. They weren't aware. CEO just happened to find out. Big blow. Did everything they could, but still you're faced with that decision, which is tricky because it comes to the question of how much social responsibility does a company have? And I guess that's a question. Like, I'm Nigerian, and I can give like an example whereby, like there were activities in a supply chain, and a decision could have been made where you prop up the community, or you do nothing and benefit from it, but you're not adding additional harm. So where's the line, right? So I think it's interesting.
But it's not untypical that you have this thinking, because we had it in recent months. We had a program which we spent quite some money on, brilliant product, good for mankind, and then we recognized there is an emission in it. It's emitting a dangerous substance. So directly we went in and said, okay, that's unacceptable. Let's look at the standard and laws and all this kind of stuff. And we said, you know what, we can't do that because the laws give a certain thing, but if we emit this substance, actually it's dangerous. So we have to go all the way, take a technical solution in. And the technical solution was found, like all these ingenious engineers we have, they found it, but then it was coming too expensive. So the business case was busted. So,
but of course
what do we do now, right?
But of course you would be the company buying this little one, because you're the big fish in the pond with Bosch. Katrin Elsemann, because as a social entrepreneur, this company basically would have fit into this, what was it called, neo-green, building phones, modular, making it all super sustainable, doing everything right. As a social entrepreneur, you're not always above board. It's impossible, is it?
It's quite interesting also to see that because of the fact that Neo-green, exposed themselves or sold themselves also as kind of a social enterprise, right? That's why they are so scrutinized so heavily. Obviously, any other company who does the same thing doesn't get the bad press because they didn't show up as the good doers before, right? So now we found the good doers who actually aren't so good anymore, and we are all happy about it because we all know, haha, nobody does it right. So that's one thing that I find really interesting. Secondly, it's a disaster, obviously, but because if you are a social enterprise, unfortunately, you have to try to do it right. And the question is, why did this happen? Right? Why did this oversight happen? Then I'd say it did happen because it's a volunteering exercise for you to go in there every day and look whether the supply chain, whether the mining is going correct. Nobody asked you before to do that. It's not in the books. You don't have to report to it, and you don't get money for it if you do it right. Okay, so I believe that's again my topic, regulations, or we can find other incentives. It doesn't always need to be a global regulation, but how can we put these things into the books? Yeah, how can we as a company start reporting on it better? Because if we start reporting on it, then we start measuring it, and if we find ways to measure the S, then we value it. Because some stuff that we don't measure, we don't value. Unfortunately, we need, quantifiable indicators around it to be able to put into the books, to be able to put into our systems and to say, well, I reported on it. And then maybe this oversight would not have happened.
We take questions. Hands up in the air. There's a gentleman right here.
Thank you for your panel. It's very insightful, and I personally really like the comment from Dr. Nicola Brandt, because I also work in NGO sector. I want to go deeper in your comment about the guidelines, because you said that like 2/3 of the member of the international trade, also follow the guideline. But how do you make sure that you have enough diversity in order to provide a guideline that is social accountability for all of the country that participate, and also for those who will want to trade with the country member? Because I think that the difference between countries in the global north and global south had a very different type of resource and also different model of government development as well. And if we are just following the guideline, if most of the members are from the global north, then it might be not really achievable for those from the global south. And then, but I think in order to achieve the S, you also have to embrace the G. And sometimes the G are not very irrational at what the global north want them to do. And the second question is for general. That is, I think that we talk about social accountability as a responsibility, as a vision that the company, the government want to achieve. But how can we think it as a value, something that we can count and can contribute for the sustainable development of your country, for the capital? Because in the end, corporate also need to make profit, and if they push a lot of money for social accountability, the profit might be reduced. And how can they subsidize for it? Does the government have anything to really transform the circular economy into a way that's more sustainable?
Wow.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You threw a lot into that. I would like to start first of all with Nicola Brandt. I mean, exactly, this diversity within the guidelines, that we don't just use whatever we think is socially accountable in the Northern Hemisphere and say that's a blueprint for the Global South. How do we do that?
Well, we engage countries of the global south. We work with the G20, for example, and then try to go beyond that and bring them to the table when there are updates, when there are due diligence guidances, where you really work on what do you need to do when there is harm, when you've identified it, and then bring in stakeholders from those countries in order to address this. But I mean, I take your point. Of course, OECD is an organization we often called the rich man's club. We don't like that. But well, the M&E guidelines are one example. The other is the work on global minimum tax. I think we brought in so many countries beyond our membership, and also the membership is becoming more diverse. So that's at least, I mean, that's the starting point in order to get something that's acceptable to a broader group of countries. And of course we do need this because there are more countries from what we would formerly have thought of as the global south that are now emerging as economic powers. So you have to engage more.
The second question I would like to give to Katrin Elsemann, also because to some extent you've touched upon it already, in the sense that how can ESG, and in particular the S, not just be a vision, but actually something of value. So, because as soon as we see something as valuable, we're sort of more inclined to actually tackle it.
Right. And there's something where a lot of social enterprises also try to put emphasis on. We develop value here, value for society, right? Value for the environment, value for the people, value for our country as well. And there are certain measures, because you alluded to what government can do. I think there are certain measures that government does, for example, to compensate companies who work in that field. For example, I think even in Germany, farmers now receive a compensation if they put part of their fields of productions to increase biodiversity. So there's certain subsidy you receive if you do that, right? Because one goal of Germany is to increase our biodiversity. We have certain targets there. We have a strategy for biodiversity until 2045, the same as we have a strategy for carbon neutrality. So there are certain mechanisms in place. In my point of view, there could be many more in place like that, because, for example, if I'm a company, if I'm a social enterprise that One of my examples before was the integration of people with certain disadvantages, be it from refugee or migrant workers, or be it people who have a disability. For example, there's a company called Auticon. Maybe some of you know it. Auticon employs people with autism or on the neurodivergence spectrum as IT consultants. So they give them they work in a very important and interesting field where there are labor shortages, and they do so by training them how to deal with a stressful job situation, and they can work in an environment they would never work there if they would not be trained by Auticon. So what type of compensation could Auticon receive, for example, through our social laws? Because obviously the government and the public saves money because certain people are less dependent on social welfare if we empower them and integrate them into work. So there are certain measurements that I see that are very important, and I think also this is the opportunity that we have here. Let us see the value that we can create, even though we can't measure it yet fully, even though we don't know who will all pay for it, but it's our responsibility to have our society go towards sustainability, social and environmental sustainability. And we have three important players here. We have government, we have private sector business, and we have maybe the NGO sector, and everyone plays its part. And corporates play their part too. And I've mentioned it before about social procurement, and we mentioned it also briefly. Every company could source so much of their value chain, upstream and downstream, from social responsible enterprises in all kinds of elements. I mean, I don't know why we have Lichtenauer medium water here, which tastes brilliantly, but maybe we could have Viva Con Agua instead next time, I mean, it's really not so difficult to look at what each corporate or university or company can do when it comes to a social responsible value chain.
Now we all feel a bit awkward about drinking that. Mind you, I don't even have it.
It's super, but it just
hands up, hands up.
It's easy.
This lady here, brown hoodie.
At least it's local.
Is it?
Is it on? Yeah, it is. Yeah, thank you so much for the panel. It was very interesting. And I guess one of the questions that came up during the workshop, and I think it was partly answered by you, but my question is, how can a business be both economically viable and committed to all the ESG factors? Because what we see now is, for example, if I have, I don't know, a clothing brand that does like sustainably sourced cotton and all that, how can I compete with the H&M's and Zara's of the world? So yeah, and I think that's one of the questions that we couldn't find an answer to during the workshop. And I guess if this situation happened to Apple, for example, it wouldn't be a problem for them to just like, to do what? And because the company was smaller, it was way harder, and they had to face the decision whether to sell or to find resources.
Although Apple has a problem with its ESG rating, because Apple doesn't disclose how it will reach its 2030 goals, which is already a sign that transparency nicely can work, right?
So a giant like Apple could stumble over...
Yeah, stumble maybe would be a too strong word, but yeah, so Apple is a little bit a topic of ambiguity here. I'm not allowed to talk about single stocks because then you all need to sign a MiFID waiver that I have advised you on the stock. But let's take a giant, a tech giant, for instance. And this tech giant fits absolutely to the current incumbent narrative of modern society, while at the same time it's a little bit looser in its commitment to sustainability because it depends heavily on raw materials and cheap labor. So here we are coming also back to the question of integrity and honesty of ourselves. We all have cell phones, me too. So here the topic starts, right? We all need to make better informed decisions, and the tricky thing is that we are all as an individual maybe cute, but altogether we are very harmful. So this is something what we also have to discuss, that together we are a very destructive force. For a company to come maybe, sorry, I have now taken actively this question without a deliberate decision that I wanted to do this, but this Apple idea came into my mind. So how I assess this from an investor's point of view. Again, we need to understand that as long as we are part about the E, and we will always remain part of the E, we will be destructive for the E, full stop. There is no way that any human action won't have any impact on the environment. The question again is about how strong and how irreversible this impact will be. So we need again to know the value, right? That the resource rent we are using in our production is still maintained in quality and quantity. If we see that this is not happening, then we need to stop the business model. And this question, companies need to disclose. So with TNFD and all this stuff, we are going in the right direction. For me, far too slow. We will communicate next week something nice at Deutsche, which makes me proud that we have reached this point at Deutsche Bank in the context of nature. It was a heavy ride. But this is something where I really would expect us and also others doing far more, disclosing not just the steering, but also giving updates and starting to plug their activity, their destructive forces towards a natural stock. So that Apple shows me how much it is really destroying the reservoirs of the natural value. This we currently don't know. We can talk about value chains forever. We won't know when a natural common is destroyed, that it won't anymore deliver what it should deliver. And this question we also won't answer through value chains. Value chain is one answer, but not the answer. We need a natural accounting system for this. And we also can broaden this to the social accounting system. Who is doing what in society? Right. But last thing, this implies also that someone is delivering what they want to deliver. We are just good when we do something which is in line with our capabilities. And then we also will find self-efficacy. But our systems currently, be it education or be it whatever, is not anymore able to deliver to the society, to the individual, a job that is in line with its capability, and hence also frustration occurs.
This is all very well. If I was this young lady, I still wouldn't quite know how to be a viable business and actually
disclose the activities
on a small level. I'm sure something like Apple, that's why I asked, won't necessarily stumble, fall, and never get up over anything like that. With smaller companies, I should imagine it is much, much tougher. And keeping an eye on the clock, I would like to try something, but it's completely up to you. We don't have time for more questions, but rather than doing the traditional takeaway round up here, if you would like to share 1, 2, 3 people your takeaway from the experience today, then that would be very, very cool and very interesting. And actually, because they've been talking, we've heard them, we know what they think. So if any of you, it doesn't take a lot of courage, you've been listening. If only you say, I still don't know what I should have done in this workshop, please. Give her a hand, she's the first.
Hello, and thank you very much for all the conversation going on. We learned a lot, but I still have some questions about, regardless the part of the government role here, because of course we are talking about regulations and all this stuff, but there is enough motivation to the other companies that they are not these multinational companies. Like, do they have the opportunity to think about this responsible and social impact? Because they have to pay taxes, and if they go straight to the regulations, it will be like a lot of money for them that at the moment they will not have because they are just starting. So my question will be like, do we have enough regards to the companies that they are just starting, or are we just focusing on multinationals, pointing the business? Okay.
So that is a takeaway, a question, whether we focus too much on multinationals and
we can
not
talk
so
about
much
it afterwards.
Small ones, exactly. There's a get-together, which will start as soon as we're done. But I'm curious in 1 or 2 more takeaways. Professor Rocholl.
I think what I take away is that the trade-offs we face are extremely complex, are extremely intellectually challenging. And this is why I feel that, and this is what we observe here at ESMT and beyond, that the brightest and the most intelligent students, as you, are now exactly so much interested in questions of ESG, because these are intellectually the most challenging, at the same time most rewarding questions. How to get the trade-off right. So therefore, really put all your brain behind it. It's fantastic, and it's great what you illustrated just in what are these trade-offs and what can be thought of in terms of trade-offs.
Cool. Yes, here we go. The microphone may be this young lady first, and we take you, and then we will have to wrap it.
Thank you all for this. It was really nice. And I think my takeoff will be from Marcus. Yes, it's that he really highlighted the fact that social accountability is very specific to different countries, because you cannot use the same for every country. I mean, actually, like I'm Nigerian like him also, so you cannot use the same guidelines and regulations you use for an European country with Nigeria, because definitely we don't have so much structure, or African countries to guide our resources. So when you're coming in, I believe that you should be able to find specific needs attached to the country, so that you can help and also take the resources. If you are taking something, you also need to put something back. And so yeah, it was really good that you highlighted that there has to be specific guidelines for each country. Yeah.
Thank you. And if you would like to hand over to the gentleman with the black polo shirt.
Hi, thanks. For me, one of the key takeaways that, as it was discussed, that mostly the public opinion is different from the public behavior. So we as an individual should behave in a more environmentally friendly manner, and maybe that will, our collective actions will put more pressure on the government and on the companies to act more environmental friendly. So that was one of the key actions, key takeaway for me, that as an individual we should be more environmental, our behavior should be more environmental friendly. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the panel. No key takeaway from you. This is what resonated out there, but a big thank you to all of you for this.
But can we ask them questions if they can do the key takeaways?
Why don't you do that over a drink and a snack? Because as far as I know, if my watch is correct, we're about 14 minutes into the networking already. Mm-hmm. Of course, we can make this part of the networking, but I think with a drink and something to eat, it's much more relaxing. So big thank you to you. Big thank you to you all.